The arena fell silent as Kenji walked onto the crystalline platform, his worn leather sheath catching the light of 3 suns. Around him, the amphitheater stretched upward for what seemed like kilometers, packed with thousands of beings from across the galaxy. The air hummed with translation matrices, converting the crowd's jeers into a cacophony of mockery in hundreds of languages. A sword. The announcement rippled through the crowd like a wave. The human brings a sword? James ignored them, his fingers resting lightly on the katana's grip. The blade had been his grandfather's, and his great-grandfather's before that. For 100 years of family history, folded steel that had been forged when humanity still thought they were alone in the universe. Now, on a station orbiting a world whose name he couldn't pronounce, it seemed almost ridiculous. The Galactic Combat Federation had very few rules. Competitors could use any weapon or enhancement they chose, provided it was carried or integrated into their own body. No remote weapons, no AI assistance beyond basic targeting. Everything else was fair game. James had studied the current champion for months, Krell'ix the Unbroken, a Thoraxian standing 3 meters tall, with 4 arms ending in plasma-edged claws that could slice through starship hulls. His exoskeleton had been enhanced with reactive armor that adapted to energy weapons in microseconds. In his last 50 matches, Krell'ix hadn't just won. He'd dismembered his opponents so thoroughly that medical nanites couldn't save them. The Thoraxian entered from the opposite gate, his massive form casting shadows across the arena floor. The crowd erupted in genuine cheers this time. Krell'ix raised all 4 arms, his mandibles clicking in what James had learned was the Thoraxian equivalent of laughter. "Human," Krell'ix's voice boomed through the translation field. "When I heard you challenged me, I thought it was a joke. When I heard you'd bring an antique, I knew it was." His claws ignited, blue plasma crackling along their edges. "This will be over quickly. For you, at least." James bowed, a precise 30-degree angle, keeping his eyes on his opponent. "I appreciate your confidence." "Confidence?" Krell'ix's mandibles spread wider. "No, human. This is certainty." He gestured to the blade. "That primitive thing against my claws? My armor adapts to energy weapons in 0.03 seconds. But I don't need it against you. You're bringing an antique to a modern fight." "Perhaps," James said softly, settling into his stance. His left foot slid back, weight distributed evenly, the katana still sheathed. "But you're assuming you understand what modern means." The referee, a floating sphere of containment field holding a quantum processor, materialized between them. "Combatants ready? This match is to incapacitation or yielding. Death is permitted but not required. By Galactic Combat Federation rules, I declare this match." "Wait!" A new voice cut through the arena. A Velcrin merchant stood in the noble boxes, his crystalline form refracting light in all directions. "I wish to offer additional stakes." The crowd murmured with interest. Additional stakes were rare, and usually meant the fight would be remembered for generations. "If the human wins," the Velcrin announced, "I will sponsor his homeworld's application for the Advanced Civilizations Council. Full voting rights, immediate technology sharing, the complete package." The arena exploded with noise. Earth had been petitioning for ACC membership for 20 years. It was always denied. Humanity was too young, too aggressive, too primitive. "And if the human loses?" the referee asked. "Then Earth remains quarantined for another century. No trade, no travel, no technology transfer." The Velcrin's facets glittered with amusement. "Seems fair, given the mismatch." James felt his jaw tighten. He hadn't known about this, but looking around at the alien faces, some amused, some pitying, some openly hostile, he understood. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about humanity's place in the galaxy. He looked at Krell'ix and saw the Thoraxian's confidence hadn't wavered. If anything, the champion seemed pleased by the raised stakes. "I accept," James said. The referee pulsed once. "Then let the match begin." Krell'ix exploded forward with a speed that defied his massive frame. The enhanced musculature beneath his exoskeleton launched him across the arena in less than a second, All 4 plasma claws extended in a pattern designed to give his opponent no escape route. James didn't move. The crowd gasped. Had the human frozen? Was he paralyzed by fear? Then, at the last possible instant, James shifted. Not a leap, not a roll. A single fluid step to the left, his body rotating as the katana remained sheathed. Krell'ix's claws passed through empty air where James had stood a heartbeat before, the plasma weapons leaving scorched trails in the crystalline floor. The Thoraxian spun, faster than something his size should be able to move, and struck again. A flurry of blows that would have reduced a starfighter to molten slag. Each one met nothing but air. James moved like water, his footwork precise and economical. Every step was exactly as long as it needed to be, no wasted motion, no panic. The blade remained sheathed. "Stand still!" Krell'ix roared, his mandibles clicking in frustration. The crowd's cheers had quieted to a confused murmur. This wasn't how fights in the arena went. The champion was supposed to dominate immediately, overwhelming his opponent with superior strength and firepower. Instead, James was making Krell'ix look slow. "Your armor adapts to energy weapons," James said calmly, circling now, maintaining perfect distance. "0.03 seconds, you said. Impressive technology." Krell'ix lunged again, this time with a more complex attack pattern. High-low, high-middle, a combination that had earned him 12 victories in the past standard year. James slipped through the assault like smoke, his eyes never leaving the Thoraxian's center mass. "But you've optimized everything for that," James continued, still not drawing his blade. "Your reactive armor, your tactics, your entire fighting style. You've faced energy weapons so often that you've forgotten the fundamentals." "Fundamentals?" Krell'ix's voice carried a note of genuine confusion now. "You speak of fundamentals while I have you running like prey? Am I running?" James asked. He stopped moving, standing perfectly still in the center of the arena. "Or am I observing?" The crowd leaned forward collectively. What was the human doing? Krell'ix's eyes narrowed. All 6 of them. This was a trap, obviously. But what kind? The human had no energy signature building up. No weapons charging. He just stood there, hand resting lightly on that absurd antique sword, perfectly balanced, perfectly calm. The Thoraxian decided to end this. He activated his armor's assault mode, channeling power from his core reactor into his limbs. His next attack would be fast enough to leave afterimages, powerful enough to crater the arena floor. No amount of footwork would save the human from this. He charged, and this time he knew it would connect. James's hand moved. Not fast, there was no blur, no superhuman speed. Just perfect timing. The katana slid from its sheath in a silver arc, the blade singing a pure note that cut through the arena's noise like a bell. The first move, May. Krell'ix's forward momentum carried him directly into the draw cut. The blade, angled at precisely 45 degrees, caught the gap between the Thoraxian's chest and arm plates, one of only 6 vulnerable points on his body, and one that could only be reached from that exact angle at that exact moment of extension. The katana, despite being just folded steel, had been crafted by a master smith who understood molecular alignment better than most species understood quantum physics. The edge was 13 atoms wide. It passed through the gap in Krell'ix's armor like it wasn't there. The Thoraxian stumbled, blue blood welling from the cut. Not deep, James had controlled the depth perfectly. Enough to injure, not enough to kill. The crowd erupted. First blood to the human. But Krell'ix was far from finished. He'd been injured before. He was called the Unbroken because he'd won matches while missing limbs. Pain was just another form of data to process. He spun, using his mass as a weapon, 2 claws sweeping low while 2 swept high. The second move, iaido. James stepped into the attack, not away from it. The most counterintuitive response possible. His blade snapped up and to the right, deflecting one high claw while his body positioning made the other high claw unable to reach. The 2 low claws passed harmlessly to either side as James moved through the gap they'd created. The katana's tip traced a line across Krell'ix's right upper arm as James passed. Another perfect cut, this time severing the neural bundle that controlled the plasma generation in that claw. The weapon sputtered and died. The Thoraxian was 3/4 of a second into his attack pattern. He'd committed to a follow-up that assumed the human would be dodging backward. Instead, James was behind him. 2 cuts. 2 moves. The crowd had gone absolutely silent. Krell turned, and for the first time in his career, uncertainty flickered across his alien features. "You studied me," he said, and it wasn't a question. "For months," James confirmed. "Every match recording available. Every interview. I watched how your armor adapts, how you move, how you think." He settled back into his stance. "You're very good at fighting people who fight like you. Modern weapons, modern tactics, modern assumptions. And you?" Krell was reassessing now, his warrior's mind analyzing everything. "I fight like my grandfather taught me, like his grandfather taught him." James's expression was serene. "For 100 years of refinement. Not technology, technique. The sword doesn't need to adapt to you. It was never obsolete." The third move was coming. Everyone in the arena could feel it. Krell'ix the Unbroken stood across from James, blue blood dripping from 2 precise cuts. Around them, the arena held its breath, thousands of beings from across the galaxy frozen in anticipation. The Thoraxian's remaining 3 plasma claws hummed with lethal energy, but his confidence had evaporated like water on a hot blade. "I underestimated you," Krell admitted, his mandibles clicking slowly. "That won't happen again." James said nothing. He'd returned to his opening stance, the katana held in a middle guard, tip angled upward at exactly 41 degrees. His breathing was calm, measured. Not the desperate gasps of someone fighting for their life, but the steady rhythm of someone performing a ritual they'd practiced 10,000 times. The Thoraxian began to circle, his massive frame moving with newfound caution. He was recalculating everything. The human's blade had found 2 weak points in rapid succession, gaps in his armor that should have been impossible to exploit in real-time combat, gaps that Krell himself had only recently discovered in training simulations. How had the human known? "You're wondering how I found your vulnerabilities," James said, reading the question in Krell's body language. "It wasn't luck. Your armor is designed to adapt to energy weapons, which means it prioritizes flexibility in those plates. The gaps have to exist for the reactive elements to function. It's not a flaw, it's a necessary design feature. Against energy weapons, those gaps don't matter because they close faster than beams can retarget." James shifted his weight slightly, the blade's angle adjusting by millimeters. "But against a fixed blade? They might as well be painted targets." Krell's eyes narrowed. The human wasn't just skilled, he was analytical. He'd identified the fundamental weakness in the Thoraxian combat doctrine. They'd optimized so heavily for one type of warfare that they'd created exploitable gaps in another. "Clever," Krell admitted. "But understanding my armor isn't enough. I fought in 12 different gravity wells, against opponents with precognitive abilities, with reaction times enhanced by neural lacing. You're fast for a human, but you're still." He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he attacked with everything he had. This time, there was no pattern, no recognizable technique. Pure chaos. 3 plasma claws striking from unpredictable angles, his massive frame using momentum and mass as weapons themselves. The assault was overwhelming. A storm of lethal energy that filled the arena with blue light and the smell of ozone. And James walked through it like he was strolling through a garden. Not superhuman speed. Not impossible reflexes. Just perfect understanding. Every movement Krell made, no matter how random it seemed, was constrained by physics, by biology, by the limits of how joints could bend and mass could shift. James had studied those constraints until they were as familiar as his own heartbeat. He knew where Krell couldn't strike even before the Thoraxian did. Knew which angles were impossible, which combinations created tiny windows of vulnerability. The katana moved in small, precise arcs, deflecting rather than blocking, redirecting force rather than opposing it. "Impossible," someone in the crowd whispered, and the translation matrices carried it through the arena. But it wasn't impossible. It was just complete. The difference between knowing a technique and embodying it. James had been practicing iaido since he was 6 years old. 32 years of daily practice. 12,000 days of drawing and cutting, of studying the geometry of blades and bodies, of learning to read movement like other people read books. Krell'ix was skilled, but he'd learned to fight in the arena. James had learned to fight from masters who'd been refining their art for 4 centuries, building on traditions that stretched back 1,000 years before that. Modern warfare had forgotten what the old masters knew. That principles don't change. Physics is physics whether you're on Earth or a space station orbiting a neutron star. A blade is a blade whether it's made of folded steel or plasma contained in a force field. And a moment of perfect timing is eternal. It came during a transition, that fraction of a second when Krell'ix shifted from a high attack to a low sweep. His weight had to shift. His center of mass had to adjust. For exactly 0.27 seconds, he would be committed to the movement, unable to stop or redirect. The third move, Suki. James's back foot pushed off the crystalline floor with perfect pressure. His body uncoiled like a spring releasing. Everything, legs, hips, core, shoulders, arms, moving in one unified wave of motion. The katana extended from a middle guard to a full thrust, the tip moving in a perfectly straight line. The blade found the gap at the base of Krell'ix's throat, just above where his exoskeleton met his chest plate. Another of those 6 vulnerable points. The tip penetrated exactly 13 millimeters, enough to pierce the secondary breathing spiracle, not enough to reach anything vital. Krell'ix froze. He could feel the cold steel against his internal anatomy. 1 more millimeter and it would puncture his primary oxygen distribution node. He wouldn't die immediately, but he'd be unconscious in seconds. James held the position, perfectly balanced. The katana extended in a flawless line from his center to the Thoraxian's throat. "Yield," James said quietly. The arena was completely silent. No cheers, no jeers, no sound at all except the hum of plasma claws slowly powering down. Krell'ix the Unbroken looked into the human's eyes and saw no anger there, no triumph, just calm certainty. This had never been about glory for James. It had been about proving a point. "I yield," Krell'ix said, his voice barely above a whisper. The referee's containment field pulsed. "Match to the human. James Kenji is the victor." The crowd exploded, but James barely heard it. He withdrew the blade carefully, wiped it clean on a cloth from his belt, and returned it to its sheath in one smooth motion. Then he bowed to Krell'ix, the same precise 30-degree angle as before. "Thank you for the match," James said. "You fought with honor." Krell'ix touched his throat where the blade had been, feeling the small wound already clotting. "3 moves," he said wonderingly. "You defeated me in 3 moves." "No," James corrected gently. "I defeated you in 12,000 days of practice. The 3 moves were just how it manifested." The medical bay was quiet compared to the chaos of the arena. James sat on an examination platform while a Velcron physician ran a photonic scanner over his vitals, checking for microtears in his muscles and ligament stress. His body would be sore tomorrow. Moving with that level of precision took its toll, but he'd escaped the match without serious injury. A small mercy considering what he'd just done. "Your cardiovascular stress is surprisingly low," the physician noted, their crystalline form refracting the medical bay's lights into rainbow patterns. "Most combatants who face Krell'ix show elevated cortisol for hours afterward. You're already returning to baseline." "I was never really in danger," James said, rotating his shoulder experimentally. "A little stiff, but nothing serious." "You certainly made it look that way." The physician's facets shifted, their equivalent of a smile. "Though I suspect that's part of the art. Isn't it? Making the impossible look inevitable." Before James could respond, the door cycled open. He recognized the visitor immediately. Ambassador Katana of the Galactic Commerce Union, a Saurian whose species had been instrumental in keeping Earth's application to the Advanced Civilizations Council perpetually stalled. "Ambassador," James acknowledged, not standing. He was still being examined, after all. Katana's scales rippled with colors James had learned to interpret as discomfort. "Mr. Kenji." That was unexpected. I imagine it was. The saurian moved closer, her tail swishing in agitation. Do you understand what you've done? The implications. I won a duel, James said simply. According to GCF rules, fairly and legally. You humiliated the champion of the Thoraxian Empire in front of half the galaxy. Kenji's crest flushed red. You used a primitive weapon to defeat someone wielding cutting-edge military technology. You made us look? She stopped, searching for the word. Obsolete, James suggested mildly. The physician made a sound that might have been a laugh, then busied themselves with their instruments. Kenji's scales went through several complicated color patterns. The Velcrin's wager was legally binding. Earth will receive ACC membership. But understand, Mr. Kenji, that you've just upset a very delicate balance. There were reasons humanity was held at arm's length. Because we're dangerous? James met her eyes steadily. Because we might destabilize things? Or because admitting we could be equals would mean rethinking assumptions? All of the above, Kenji said bluntly. She sat down across from him, suddenly looking tired. The galactic community has been stable for 3,000 years. We have our hierarchies, our systems, our ways of doing things. Humanity has been observed for less than a century. You're young, aggressive, unpredictable. Keeping you contained seemed prudent. Prudent, James repeated, tasting the word. We call it something else. Bigotry, xenophobia, fear of the unknown. Perhaps. Kenji didn't argue. But today, you demonstrated something that terrifies the established powers more than human aggression ever did. What's that? That we might be wrong. She stood, her tail dragging on the floor. Wrong about what constitutes advancement. Wrong about which technologies matter. Wrong about assuming newer is always better. She paused at the door. Krell'ix's armor cost 17 million credits. Your sword is, what? A few hundred years old. 412, James confirmed. Give or take. And it beat him decisively. Kenji's scales shifted to a pattern James didn't recognize. There's a saying in the old Saurian texts. The student obsessed with the newest technique never masters the fundamentals. We forgot that. We all forgot that. Your species. You remember. After she left, the physician finished their examination in silence. Finally, they spoke. You know this won't end with ACC membership, don't you? Every warrior species in the galaxy just watched you defeat Krell'ix. They'll want to test themselves against you. Against humanity. James had expected this. Let them come. But they should know I'm not special. Back on Earth, there are a dozen people in my dojo alone who could have done what I did today. Thousands more across the planet who practice other martial arts to the same level of dedication. We're not superhuman. We remember what matters. And what matters? Principles. Fundamentals. Truth. James accepted the clean bill of health from the physician and stood, retrieving his katana from the secure locker. Technology changes. Fashion changes. Politics change. But physics, geometry, the biomechanics of how bodies move, those are eternal. Master the eternal, and the temporary becomes manageable. He left the medical bay to find a crowd waiting. Not hostile, curious. Beings from dozens of species, many of them warriors themselves, looking at him with new eyes. Looking at his primitive weapon with new respect. A young Thoraxian approached, barely adult by their species standards. Master Kenji? I watched the match. Could you teach me? Not to use a katana necessarily, but to understand what you understand. James considered the eager face, the genuine desire to learn. He thought about his grandfather who'd taught him, about the masters before stretching back through centuries. Knowledge preserved and passed down, refined and purified, kept alive not in databases or neural lacing but in the simple act of student and teacher, practice and repetition. I'm not a master, James said. But yes, I can teach you what I know. On one condition. Anything. That you promise to teach others in turn. That's how this works. That's how it's always worked. He smiled. Knowledge isn't meant to be hoarded. It's meant to be shared, refined, and passed forward. The young Thoraxian's mandibles clicked in excitement. Behind them, others pressed forward with questions, requests, challenges. James felt the weight of it, not burden but responsibility. Today he'd won a duel. Tomorrow he'd begin helping to reshape what the galaxy understood about strength, skill, and the true meaning of advancement. His grandfather would have been proud. 6 months later, the space station had transformed. What had been a simple training facility for James had expanded into something unprecedented. The first human martial arts academy in galactic space. The main hall stretched 100 meters across, its floors a mixture of traditional hardwood and modern anti-grav mats, accommodating both human and alien students whose anatomies required different training surfaces. James walked through the morning practice session, observing. 50 students from 24 species moved through basic kata, not just with katana, but with dao, gladius, spear, and staff. Each weapon system taught the same fundamental principles in different contexts. Balance, timing, distance, awareness. A Thoraxian struggled with a bakken, her forearms creating coordination problems that human forms never faced. James moved to her side. "Breathe, Thrall," he said gently. "You're treating each arm independently. That's your first mistake." "But I have 4 arms," Thrall said, frustration clicking in her mandibles. "The forms were designed for 2. The forms were designed for unified movement," James corrected. He demonstrated with his own practice sword, his body moving as a single unit. 2 arms, for arms 6. Doesn't matter. The principle is the same. Your center moves, your limbs follow, not the other way around. He guided her through the motion again, this time having her focus on her core rotation first, letting her arms respond naturally to that movement rather than trying to control them independently. On the 3rd repetition, something clicked. Her motion smoothed out, all 4 arms moving in harmony. "There," James said. "Feel that?" Thrall's eyes widened. "All 6 of them." Yes, it's like they're all part of the same thought instead of 4 different thoughts." "Exactly." James moved on to the next student, a Velcrin who was having trouble with footwork. Their crystalline structure made them naturally stable, which paradoxically made learning to move fluidly more difficult. In the corner of the hall, a group of advanced students sparred under the supervision of Master Tanaka, one of 3 other instructors James had requested from Earth. She was 78 years old, barely 5 feet tall, and could consistently disarm students twice her size regardless of their species. Her specialty was aikido, and she'd adapted the techniques to work with alien anatomies that sometimes defied human expectations. James watched a match where she guided a massive chronac through a joint lock that should have been impossible given that chronac joints bent in 3 different planes simultaneously. Somehow, Tanaka had found the principle beneath the anatomy and made it work. Impressive facility. James turned to find Ambassador Katana standing at the entrance. She'd visited several times since the match, her initial hostility gradually transforming into something closer to fascination. "Ambassador, I wasn't expecting you today. I brought someone who wanted to meet you." She gestured, and Krell himself entered the hall. The former champion had changed since their match. He wore simple training clothes instead of his armor, and carried no weapons. More significantly, he moved differently, less aggressive, more centered. James recognized the change immediately. Krell had been studying. "Master Kenji," Krell said, bowing in the human style. A little awkward still, but sincere. "Just James, please. I'm no master." He returned the bow. "What brings you here?" "I've spent the last 6 months reviewing every match I ever fought," Krell said. "I thought I understood combat. I was the champion, after all. But after losing to you, I realized I'd never actually understood the principles. I just accumulated techniques and technology." He gestured to the training floor. "I've been watching recordings of your students, reading about human martial arts. There's a depth there that we lost, that maybe we never had." His mandibles clicked softly. "I came to ask if you'd accept me as a student." James studied the Thoraxian carefully. Pride was a complicated thing across species, but he recognized the weight of what Krell was asking. To go from champion to student was humbling enough. To do so publicly, learning from the person who defeated you, was something else entirely. On one condition, James said finally. Name it. You have to start at the beginning. White belt, basic forms, alongside students who've never fought a day in their lives. No special treatment, no shortcuts because you're already skilled. If you want to understand the principles, you have to build from the foundation up. Krell didn't hesitate. I accept. Then welcome to the academy. James smiled. Class starts in 10 minutes. Master Tanaka runs the beginner's session. Fair warning. She's tougher than I am. After Krell departed to change into training clothes, Kenna lingered. You know what you're doing, don't you? This isn't just a school. It's a revolution. I wouldn't go that far, James said. But Kenna cut him off. 300 years ago, the Saurian Empire was the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Do you know how we achieved that? She didn't wait for an answer. Advanced weapons. Superior technology. We could bombard planets from orbit, hack enemy systems, deploy drones by the thousands. We were unbeatable. What changed? We fought the Krell'ix. They had none of our advantages. Their technology was centuries behind ours. But they'd spent those centuries perfecting something we'd forgotten. How to fight in close quarters, in conditions where technology failed, with nothing but skill and determination. Her scales shifted to a rueful blue. They didn't beat us, but they held us to a stalemate, made our technological superiority irrelevant by forcing us to fight on their terms. She watched the students practicing. That's what you're teaching. How to make technology irrelevant. How to reduce combat to its essentials. Every warrior who studies here goes back to their people with that knowledge. Within a generation, the entire galactic paradigm of warfare will shift. Good, James said simply. Maybe then there will be less warfare altogether. Kenya's laugh was bitter. You're optimistic. I see it differently. When everyone has access to the same fundamental principles, when technology provides less advantage. She trailed off. When that happens, James finished for her. People have to actually talk to each other, have to negotiate, have to find solutions that don't rely on one side having bigger guns. He met her eyes. That's not a bug, Ambassador. That's the entire point. A commotion at the entrance drew their attention. A news crew had arrived, Galactic Media, judging by the multispectrum cameras. The reporter, a floating gas entity from one of the nebula systems, approached with their translation matrix active. Master Kenji, we're doing a feature on the human martial arts phenomenon. Can you comment on the proliferation of training halls across GCF space? 17 facilities have opened in the last month alone, all claiming to teach traditional human combat techniques. James's jaw tightened. He'd heard about this. Opportunists capitalizing on humanity's sudden reputation, teaching watered-down or completely fabricated techniques to aliens who didn't know better. I can't control what others do, he said carefully. But I can say this, real martial arts isn't about learning to hurt people efficiently. It's about discipline, respect, understanding. Anyone teaching otherwise isn't teaching the art, they're just teaching violence with a fancy name. And how would students know the difference? The same way they've always known. Time, practice, and honest teachers. He gestured to the hall. Real teaching produces results you can measure, not just in combat effectiveness, but in character. If a school produces students who are more aggressive, more violent, more quick to fight, that's not martial arts. That's just training thugs. The interview continued, but James felt the weight of it. This was the real challenge, he realized. Not winning the duel with Krell, not even establishing the academy. It was ensuring that what spread across the galaxy was the truth of martial arts, the philosophy, the discipline, the humanity, not just the techniques stripped of their context. That evening, after the students had gone and the halls were quiet, James sat in his private quarters with the katana across his lap. He'd been polishing it, maintaining the blade the way his grandfather had taught him. The ritual was meditative, a way to clear his mind and reflect on the day. His communicator chimed. Earth frequency. James? It's Yuki, his senior classmate from the old dojo. I've been watching the news. You're causing quite a stir up there. Wasn't intentional, James said. I just fought a duel. And won. Against impossible odds. Using our art. Yuki paused. Sensei would have been proud. Hell, I'm proud. But James? Are you ready for what comes next? What do you mean? You opened a door. Showed the galaxy that humanity has something valuable to offer that's not just technology or resources. That's huge. But doors swing both ways. Yuki's voice grew serious. We're getting requests here too. Aliens wanting to study on Earth to learn from the source. Politicians wanting to weaponize martial arts to create super soldier programs. Corporations wanting to monetize and franchise the techniques. James closed his eyes. Of course. He'd been so focused on teaching, on spreading knowledge, that he hadn't fully considered how that knowledge might be twisted, exploited, corrupted. What do I do? What Sensei taught us, Yuki said. Keep teaching the truth. Don't compromise. Don't let them turn the art into something it's not. A pause. And don't do it alone. We're forming a council here, representatives from different martial arts schools, different traditions. We'll establish standards, create a certification process, make sure that anyone teaching in humanity's name is actually teaching humanity's values. Relief flooded through James. He wasn't alone in this. The community that had preserved these arts for centuries wouldn't let them be corrupted now. Thank you, he said quietly. Thank you. You reminded the galaxy, and honestly reminded us why these traditions matter. Now we just have to make sure that lesson sticks. After the call ended, James returned to polishing his blade. Outside his window, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance. Somewhere out there, students he'd taught were practicing, passing along what they'd learned. The ripples spreading, impossible to predict or control. But that was okay, he realized. That was how it was supposed to work. You taught the truth as best you understood it. You passed it forward with integrity. And then you trusted that the principles themselves, the eternal, unchanging principles, would endure. His grandfather had trusted that. The masters before him had trusted that. James Kenji, the human who defeated a galactic champion in 3 moves, who'd started a revolution with 400 years of folded steel, could do no less. He sheathed the katana, bowed to it respectfully, and set it in its stand. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, new opportunities to teach what humanity had always known. That the strongest weapon wasn't forged in a factory or assembled in a lab. It was forged in the discipline of 10,000 repetitions, in the humility to learn from those who came before, and in the wisdom to know that some truths never become obsolete. The galaxy was learning that lesson now, and James would make sure they learned it right.